I pray to you, pray to you. You are sacred, you are looking at me. Grandmother, I see you sitting in the earth. You are sacred, and you are looking at me. I pray to you, pray to you. You are sacred, you are looking at me. Everyone join me. Put your hand on your heart. Grandmother, I see you sitting in my heart. You are sacred, and you are looking at me. I pray to you, pray to you. You are sacred, you are looking at me.
It's a tough spot to be in the first spot. And in many circumstances, I would say, oh, that's actually very appropriate because the great mother, the ancient mother, was the source of the first civilization. But I am with women of equally ancient, probably more ancient civilizations. So we can throw ourselves up in the air and it'll be fun. So forgive me if I'm a little rough around the edges because I'm really truly speaking spontaneously. I expected some questions and we have a conversation, which we will have. So I hope you'll indulge me. As I was listening to Barbara, all thoughts went from my head, and a little of that self-consciousness is here now. And I was fully in the presence of the grandmother. I look out at you, and I am fully in the presence of the grandmother. And my self-consciousness comes from wanting to do her and to do you justice. And I am always struggling with the question of whether I'm good enough to do that. And she's always saying, shut up, get to work. And go first. She's got a wicked sense of humor. The plight for women of Western culture has been the lack of presence, of honoring, of knowing, of being with the fullness of the divine feminine. It's impossible to do away with her, so she has always manifested in the religious traditions that came after the great goddess. You can't do away with her any more than you can do away with the earth. We don't believe in the goddess. We experience her. We know her. She resides for us within our hearts. And in a culture that has never trusted the wisdom of women, quite the contrary, it certainly has never trusted the wisdom of the heart. Along with that, it hasn't trusted the wisdom of the body, and it hasn't trusted the wisdom of the earth. It's almost impossible to speak of the divine feminine without speaking of the wisdom of our hearts and without speaking of the wisdom of the earth, because they are one. They are the same thing. And yet, for at least 2,000 years, and actually longer, the Western world have largely not only forgotten her, but denied her existence. In 1993, at the Parliament in Chicago, I did a panel on the Divine Feminine and was hard-pressed to find women who had already registered to be on the panel with me. And there were very few people in the room. No surprise, I guess. Although there was, at the time, a strong and growing women's spirituality movement, and there were men participating in their own way in that movement as well. But it was not visible. It was, in academic circles it was visible. In feminist circles it was visible. But it was not visible within the culture itself. And things have changed. They've changed remarkably. I have recently been elected to the Board of Trustees of the Council of the Parliament of the World's Religions. So things have really changed. And I'm following in the footsteps of another woman who's been serving on the board, whose work is devoted to the Great Mother. I'm trying to think of what it is that I need to say to you that you don't already somehow know yourselves. You know? And maybe all I can do is reflect back to you a little bit of what it is that you already know, and maybe in articulating it in this form, it helps to give voice to your dreams, your heart, and to hers, and to make manifest what we all yearn for, which is the wisdom of the Divine Feminine. She's on her way back, and I do think that she's a little pissed off. So get the instructions of don't be angry, and I think it's fine if she's a little bit angry. I think actually it's very healthy, because it's a survival impulse right now. Because with her death comes ours, and with her loss, all is lost. And it is a culture that has been empty of the Divine Feminine that has brought about the cataclysm by being divorced from the earth, by being divorced from the feminine, by being divorced from women and feelings. The culture has become radically imbalanced, dangerously so. And ideas of domination, of naming things in order to have control of them rather than listening to them, to be told what they are and what your place is in relationship to them, we've lost that art. So we consume and we eat and we destroy, and you know all of this. And it has brought us to the brink of disaster. We sit here in this room in a convention that comes every 5 years, and I wonder what will come in 5 years from now. Whether we will even be able to meet. The resources that it requires, the planes that are used to travel, that do damage, all of these things are coming to a crisis. One of the most extraordinary things about the Divine Feminine, as I've watched her coming into the lives of women, is how she empowers them, how she gifts them, how she shows them who they truly are in the fullness of their being, in all of the ways that have been taboo and forbidden, like menstrual blood and giving birth and being angry. And at the same time, because of her wholeness, she balances all of that earthiness with a shining light of continuous spirit and peace. And when you began and you started with, may her light descend, it does, but it also ascends. And that's been probably one of the greatest gifts that I've received by trying to serve her, is the knowledge that this is the realm which is sacred. It may be equally sacred up there, out there, somewhere else, but this realm in which we live is the fully embodied divinity that we seek, that we yearn for, and that we long for. and she is ever present. We don't believe in the goddess, we experience her. I see her in every one of you, including the men. And I see her outside in the air and the flowering trees and the earth itself and all of the forces that grow and all of the creatures that she nourishes and sustains. She is the living embodiment of divinity. Not an abstract idea, not a belief, but a reality. I often think that we exist, in a certain sense, we exist continuously within the womb of the goddess, that we move within her sphere. As long as we are alive on this planet, we are moving within her grace. It was a tremendous challenge. I was not raised in a religious household. I was raised in an intellectual household. And at an early age, I asked my parents what our religion was because the kids across the street were going to Catholic school and the kids next door were going to Hebrew school. And my mother said, well, you're half Viking and half Maccabee, so that makes you all warrior. And I said, what about God? And she said, well, when you grow up, if that's really of interest to you, rather than our indoctrinating you or telling you this, you can go and figure it out for yourself. I had no interest and no intention. I was a social justice lawyer and didn't even know that there was a within. Let alone that there was a goddess inside there. Which I still doubt, but I don't doubt that she's in you. And interestingly enough, in law school, where I was being overwhelmed with logos, where it was all about law and order, not the TV show, but law and order and the rational and the intellectual and the mind cut off from the body, and in some sense, the law detached from emotion, detached from the reality, from all the messy things of people's lives. That's when I heard her. That's when she started calling. It was literally a calling. And I had no idea who or what was calling me. I had no framework, nothing, absolutely nothing. And to this day, I can't, I think she calls to everyone. I think she's called to everyone in this room, which is why you're all here. I'm not sure why I responded, but she called and I followed her. And it was a very long journey through very odd places, like things called witchcraft, which could not have been more bizarre to who I was at the time, but which in fact held a secret of the sacred, the divine feminine. That was back in the 70s. And when I began this, there was Carol Christ and a few essays and Mary Daly and not a whole lot. There wasn't a whole lot. So almost from the beginning, we were following our longing. We were following the call, and we were following our hearts. And we didn't really know what it was we were looking for. To some extent, some people looked to Mary and found things there, but not enough, because she was a virgin, and it was only a part of what we knew. It was part, not all. But together we searched. I had some remarkable experiences early on where I was privileged to do some retreats with some wonderful nuns who said things that I never expected. I thought they might feel a little nervous or antagonistic towards us. I said, not even remotely. And one of the gifts that they gave me when I was really a child in all of this was, one of them said to me, I really admire the courage that all of you have, that you can leave the faiths of your fathers and the houses of worship of your fathers, and you can go out into the wilderness and seek something that people have not seen, at least in the Western world, for a very long time, and that you can find her, and that you can have the strength of your convictions to know that what you find is real and true and valuable, and that it has meaning, that it's real. And it doesn't require the imprimatur of an institution. That's a frightening thing to undertake. And it's been a long journey of struggle and mystery and working with other women and men and a labyrinth, walking a labyrinth, to find her and then to bring her out of the underworld where she's been for the last several thousand years, to bring her out of the underworld and back to the world itself. But that's one of the mysteries of the Mother that we've learned, that at the core of her energy is this gift of rebirth, that from destruction, creation is restored. In beginning to learn about her wisdom, that was one of the most important things. And it was the seed that I was nurturing within myself, and that I found being nurtured within not just thousands, but now millions of women, and women have been brought from the Western world to faith traditions where the divine feminine has resided and remained. She is returning. And with her return comes the balance, I believe, that has been lost in ourselves and in our culture, in the world. I fervently believe, and it has been my experience, that this is the energy of rebirth. This is the energy of the heart. This is the energy that we've lost. This is the energy of the earth that ascends through us and is spoken by us and lived by us and made manifest in the world. That's her gift to us, is that she is present. And now we don't have a lot of time, because in our blindness and our not seeing her, we've done tremendous damage. So we have a lot of work to do, and I'm sure that with her presence in our hearts, we're going to accomplish what she needs us to. So thank you for indulging me. Thank you very much. And now I would like to invite Venerable Carmelite Tomo.
Aloha. Namaste and Hashi Dele. Congratulations, you are alive. Here at the Parliament, it's often assumed that everyone is headed toward the same divine reality. But in fact, in a way that would exclude many human beings. Maybe about 1/3 of humanity, at least. I mean, we got the Chinese, that's 1 billion, and non-believers, which is up to around 1 billion. So if we're really aiming toward religious harmony and interreligious understanding, I think it's important to recognize that the language we use is significant, and that we cannot assume that everyone believes as we do. Perhaps I'm a bit sensitive to this because I grew up with a fundamentalist mother who was horrified at when I expressed the fact that I was a Buddhist. I think I was 11. Because she was convinced, in her system of thought, that meant that I was condemned to eternal damnation, along with the Catholics. So with that introduction, I go into a sort of discussion of the principle of femininity, or the feminine. What do we mean by that? From a Buddhist perspective, the idea is the transformation of consciousness. And each sentient being, including the animals, including unseen beings, has consciousness, moment-to-moment consciousness. And the idea is that now it's polluted, but we want to purify it and become awakened. So everyone can do that. If we posit something called a feminine consciousness, we set up an opposition with a masculine consciousness, or perhaps some other kind of consciousness. But from a Buddhist perspective, in the nature of consciousness, there is no masculine or feminine, right? There's no gender, right? Your consciousness doesn't have genitalia. What would that look like? Right? So we're using a different language, and just to give you a little introduction, Buddhism began with a woman. Her name was Maya, which means illusion. And she was the mother of the Buddha. Without Mother Maya, there would have been no Buddha. And therefore, there would have been no Buddhism. The first person who offered milk rights to the Buddha after his 6 years of ascetic practices was also a woman. Her name was Sujata. And when they tell the Buddha story, they always talk about Sujata. When he decided that he would eat again, he accepted milk rights from her, for which he was later criticized, actually. But due to her kindness, actually, I think the lights down is a little bit better. Huh?
Yes.
Thank you. Well, okay, so after she gave him the rice pudding, he went across the river, he became the awakened one, and became a teacher for how to get rid of suffering. I teach one thing and one thing only, suffering and the end of suffering. And then he died. Okay, so he was a human being, not divine. Not divine. An ordinary human being who became awakened, and we can too, whether we are men or women. Again, here's another representation of Sujata offering the rice pudding. So we do have images of women, or images of we could say feminine images, but with a different twist. Okay, and here's another image of the Buddha. Now, the Buddha is always represented as male in early Buddhism. And there are even some Buddhists who believe that one must take rebirth as a male in the final incarnation in which we realize or manifest our awakening. We could practice as a bodhisattva in either a male or a female body, but in the final analysis, in the end, when we manifest as a Buddha, we would manifest in this form, as a Buddha with 84 marks, characteristics, one of which is a male thing. I'm not making this up. This is Mahapajapati, who was the Buddha's aunt and stepmother. His mother passed away when he was 7 days old, according to legend, and he was raised by his auntie, his father married his mother's sister, which was the custom in those days. And she was the first Buddhist nun. There's a long story about how she requested admission into the monastic order. He hesitated 3 times, did not deny her request, but hesitated 3 times. Eventually, she became a nun and was the leader of the order of nuns for many years throughout her life, and she lived a very long life. So again, we have an example of an enlightened woman from the very earliest history of Buddhism. But we rarely see images of her. In all my years as a Buddhist, I had never seen an image of Mahapajapati until a few years ago when I went to Vietnam. And there in Vietnam, she's everywhere. This particular painting is found in many nuns' temples, and also this painting of Mahapajapati with 5 disciples. So this is sort of patterned on the Buddha teaching his first 5 disciples. There are many other images when we come to the Tibetan, the Tantric tradition, the Vajrayana tradition, where it is said that we can become enlightened in any form, male or female. And you see men visualizing themselves as women. It's the most common practice in all Tibetan monasteries and Mongolian and Bhutanese and many Nepalese to visualize oneself as Tara. Now this is green Tara. Tara has 21 forms or aspects with different gestures, different colors. This is Tara, a green Tara, who represents virtuous activity. And there are many images of enlightenment that look feminine. So you might notice that many look sort of androgynous, whereas Vajradhara, the primordial Buddha, is, well, more or less genderless, but usually portrayed as male. Here you can see that the aspect is quite feminine. And here too, pretty obvious, and here too. So green Tara is probably the most popular. You see her even here at the Mahabodhi Stupa in Bodh Gaya, which is the site of the Buddha's enlightenment, according to the story. And here is white Tara. She has eyes, 7 eyes, where she is able to see the sufferings of the world. And she is particularly sort of conceived as protecting the long life of practitioners. If you're a butcher, short life is okay. But if you're a practitioner, long life is important. We also see that Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, becomes a woman in China. So when Buddhism travels to China, for whatever reason, there's several good studies that have just come in about the gender transformation of the Bodhisattva of compassion, who is known as Kuan Yin in China. So here is the 1,000-armed Chenrezig, or Avalokiteshvara, and we have also an image of her here. We have right here on our altar, Avalokiteshvara and Tara. So she's become quite popular. The 1,000 arms here, not all 1,000 arms are depicted, but they each have an eye in each hand to see the sufferings of the world, and 1,000 hands to do something about them. This is another image of Kuan Yin, my personal favorite, which is from Penang. But you'll see her in many different guises. You also see real live human images of the feminine. This is Machik Labdren from the 13th century in Tibet. She was a flesh and blood woman who from a young age had a special talent for reading the Buddhist texts and reciting certain prayers, and so she became very, very popular. Later she decided to practice as a laywoman, but is still revered throughout Tibetan cultural regions. This is also a real-life woman from Vietnam. So you see that in some countries, for example Vietnam, the awakened experience of women is honored. We find altars that remember the achievements of highly realized women. We find Buddhist women everywhere we go. This is Laos. And this is in the Himalayan region of Spiti. This is the first Sri Lankan nun who revived the full ordination for women in Sri Lanka just 20 years ago. And great meditation teachers. This happens to be the leading Zen master of Korea. A famous teacher of Taiwan. Devotional practices. Women are practicing. They've always been given the freedom to practice, not always the instructions to understand what they're doing, or the encouragement to develop as religious teachers or leaders. But we're working on it. Yes, that's why we have this Sakadika movement, which began just 22 years ago in Bodh Gaya, to connect Buddhist women from around the world and encourage them, to help prepare them as teachers, work for full ordination in the Buddhist tradition. We're doing quite well, considering in 20 years. The changes are quite significant. These are Korean laywomen and nuns practicing together. It's Mongolia, a ritual specialist. This is a woman who was born a Thomas Christian, who is now a Buddhist professor of psychology, doing sacred dance from a Buddhist perspective. And these are some nuns who belong to the Dalit movement in India, about 10 million people who have converted to Buddhism because they are considered untouchables in India, and so they've switched over. And these are Himalayan nuns doing something that probably would interest our pagan sisters and brothers. It looks very similar to the Karens. And again, young nuns, many hundreds of young nuns flocking to the monasteries throughout Asia, even now. Even though the numbers of monks are declining, the numbers of nuns are increasing. And they are praying for us all now and praying for peace in the world. So thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. We could perhaps have the lights back up. That would be great. And I would like to invite Mother Maya to speak to us again.
Namaste.
Namaste.
I am Mother Maya. Maybe the mother of Buddha. Because after all, born Hindu. Okay. The Hindu culture. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Buddhi Rupena Namastute Namastute Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Shakti Rupena Samstita Namastasai Namastasyai Namastasyai Namo Namaha. To the Mother, who is the Shakti, the power of the universe. To the Mother, who is the intellect of the universe. In the Hindu tradition, much has been misunderstood, partly because of practice, partly because it is complex. The rishis of yore understood the infrastructure of memory and the creation in terms of its sound, its audibility, and its manifestation. The Shakti principle in Hinduism is about Mother. In the early 60s, there was a wonderful experiment on Mother. The rhesus monkeys were used, 2 babies, to determine if they had the instinct to know Mother. They set up 2 mothers. One was made of wire and had a bottle of milk. And another mother had no milk, no food, but just a blanket and a face on her. And the infant baby monkey instantly ran to the mother with a face and a soft blanket. It shows us that the primordial impetus in our humanity is always moving towards Mother. Mother in any tradition, Mother in any form, whether we call her Amma, Mata, Mother, Ma, she is the first syllable on the mouth of every babe of every tradition. I do believe that it is not just that we are only coming into a time of the maternal, but it has always been there, the understanding that it is the very basis of our existence. And that what I call the material and the maternal and the mother consciousness has to be reinvoked. It is not that we have had absences of mother in any of our traditions over any period of time. It is simply that we have been trained and habituated to forget mother. And it is an interesting principle and practice as to why we continually forget her. Because if we remember her, we must remember every grain of sand has sentiency, that every nature, that the trillions of dollars that Mother Nature gives to us every day for free is from Mother, from the maternal principle. And that maternal principle is the womb through which all of our patriarchs and men have come through. However, there is a primordial fear about it, and that is why Mother has been put in the back seat for so long. But as all of my incredible colleagues have just said, Mother is on her way back. Now, we understand that basically we cannot separate the genders because we have enough reductionism, fragmentization, and fractionalization happening all the time. And that is always at the expense of the mother consciousness. Whatever we experiment with to discover what is seems to create damage. Whether it is through our food source, whether it is through our intelligence source, whether it is through the reproductive abilities of our female species, we are looking at an incredible incursion against the principle of the maternal. And in my opinion, unless and until we revert back there to understand that mother comes first, it is in fact the only principle that sustains us. In the Hindu tradition, in fact in the Shakta tradition within Hinduism, we have the incredible, not just imagery and poetry, but the phenomenal knowledge that tells us about the intelligence of Devi, the goddess mother, who is seen actually carried on the backs of Shiva and Brahma and Indra and Vishnu. She's carried regally and royally across the universe because she holds that power, that primordial power that makes manifestation happen, continue to happen, and continue to flourish. So how does that come down to this understanding of how I, the person, can reclaim my awareness of the maternal? In order for us to have the harmony and peace that we are looking for from this brilliant and humongous Congress, in order for us to have the peace and inner harmony that we require in our family in order to continue and spread out to our community, we must look at one singular thing first, something we can do. We talk about the pathways to practices, the practices that can help us to reclaim the maternal in our lives. But how are we going to get there unless one significant thing happens within us? And it has to be the individual journey, because change and transformation cannot come from the group, or from a community, or from the government, or even from these amazingly motivated congresses that intend to motivate our spirit, which is a great thing to do. What is that one singular thing? That because of our ancestors and because of our traditions and in spite of both, we, the human being, have it. And that is your awareness. What is the only thing we can control in the world, in the human anatomy? Is it our mind? We wouldn't have so many forms of meditation if it was that. Is it the breath? Well, once expired, we die in the physical body, not the spirit. Certain quota is given to us for each life, how we walk the journey. Depends on how long we're going to shuffle along with breath. So it's not breath. Others say, mind, thoughts, breath. Oh, my response. Okay. You could get up in the morning and have an incredible intention to be at peace with yourself and let nothing bother you. And then your neighbor comes out. And all of your great intentions go to smithereens. And then you recompose yourself and go on. And then get the backlash of guilt for not keeping that intention, you know, like New Year resolutions. We look to lose weight, we gain weight. We become guilty, we gain more. It becomes a tedious cycle. Look, I work in very arduous conditions for the most part, and that is through the mother omission. In places where you would not believe there is such manifold layers of pathology, such as in one family, HIV, AIDS, as well as drug addiction, as well as several different layers of diseases. In the inner cities of New York, in Guyana, South America, and soon to go back to India, is the mother omission. And what we discover there every day is that practices alone and a concept of understanding is not good enough. It has to come back down to you, the individual person. We cannot isolate the feminine from the masculine, no more than we can isolate God from ourselves. As a Hindu, I do not seek to believe in God. We seek to know God. Because God is right there within. God has never been without, outside, somewhere up there, somewhere down below, forgetting us in times of disease. Look, when we're happy, least of all when we are happy, we learn anything. We simply collect karmas we don't necessarily need to serve us. But please be happy. It is only through the challenges of the diseases and challenges of hardships and suffering and all of these things that if we are conscious of one thing in our own journey, we can learn from. And that one thing, as I said before, is our awareness. The greatest wealth in the world, the greatest stock in the world is the wealth of that awareness which each and every one of us carry. How we shape it depends on our individual journey, our individual traditions. And if we keep in the centrifugal center of that awareness the fact that we are mother, that mother holds up the power, the primordial energies that support all of it, we are going to be very awareful of consciousness, because consciousness has no products. Doesn't matter how many workshops in consciousness and unconditional love we attend, we end up with a lot of fatigue syndrome. I see this in the world of health and healing. And basically we need to be more reserved about what the awareness, your awareness, it is akin to your ancestors. It is the platform on which all is held, and mother, the mother of your traditions, hold up that platform. The men serve a phenomenal role. They have more of the Shiva energy, we can say. Women need to take their places in serving the divine feminine role because they have more of the Shakti principle that is not only responsible for creation, procreation, but for the creativity and the sustenance, the nourishment and nurturance of life from food all the way up or down, whichever way we look at it. That energy of preservation within the woman is phenomenal. We need to reclaim our reproductive rights again and take it back away from wherever it is now being held. We need to reclaim, how can we be intuitive by learning to be intuitive? We can only be intuitive when the awareness is honed and awakened. And one small shift in awareness is all it requires for you to be aware that I am not aware. Because awareness, after all, is not all the quantum goals and leaps that we take, it is a quantum leap for humanity if each one of us have a little bit more awareness. Many students come to me and say, I've taken the vrata or the vow of ahimsa last year, and ahimsa means non-hurting, non-violence, non-harming the self. But I am still responding in anger. And I say, last year you were not aware of the fact that you're responding in anger. This year you're aware that your response is angry. That's all there is to awareness. Because after a while, the inner witness, or sakshi as we say in Sanskrit, is awakened. Our inner witness is always awakened. It's just sort of besotted by so many layers of things, especially as women, because whether or not we are being supported by the primordial feminine energy simply because we may not be aware that it's there to support us, we're always carrying the larger load. And so I say to each one of us, as women, live in your primordial power as a feminine person. Sit and take the pause that can brighten up your awareness of who you are. Help support your children, all children, and the men of our communities and society to understand that we have always had the unshakable power of being mother, whether or not we give birth to children. Women also have had a backlash from this primordial fear that our patriarchs have been experiencing, unknown to them, by the way, for centuries on end. The primordial fear of the mother creates some phenomenal things because it is, in fact, something we need to come to terms with, to understand. But women, we cannot help but to love our mother because mother is non-negotiable. So if we understand that, we'll be able to claim the riches within our own femininity. Om Namah Shivaya. Thank you for this opportunity. And its team for bringing us here today and throughout this week for their gallant and splendid efforts in helping to motivate us all into our own awareness. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to invite Sister Joan Chittister to speak with us.
Okay, and now for the shock of the moment, of the morning. A Christian who believes that there's a divine feminine there too. There's a subject that's intimately connected to the development of the world and the impact of faith, I think, that we almost never talk out loud about in the West, and that's the subject of the feminine dimension of God. And yet, I will argue that what we think of the divine feminine in Christianity or any other tradition will determine eventually what we think about everything else in life. There are three stories I use to point to the problem. In the first, a tribal elder says to a small child, "Remember, child, as you grow, there are two wolves that fight for dominance within us at all times." And the child answers back, "Well, grandfather, which wolf will win?" And the elder answers, "It depends, child, on which wolf you feed." The story is very clear if you give it enough thought. What we become depends on what parts of ourselves we choose to develop. The second story is the story of the three Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. In each, the book of Genesis reads quite clearly, "Let us make humans in our own image. Male and female, let us make them." Think about it, because that meaning is clear too. If we limit ourselves to a consciousness of the divine masculine, we'll never see the divine feminine, and that will stunt our souls, and it will as well affect and is affecting and has affected the nature of our global decisions as well. Finally, the last story is a personal one. The night his young mother died, Jimmy, 5 years old, was sitting on my lap, gazing up at the crucifix on the bedroom wall. Well, he said, more to himself than to me, by now, I guess, Mama is in God's stomach. Now, yeah, right. So I just couldn't resist. I couldn't pass up the moment. I said, Jimmy, whatever makes you think that Mommy is in God's stomach? Well, the little philosopher said, I figured the only way that, God can be all around us, like Sister says, is if we're all in God's stomach. Suddenly, I realized that night that child, like all the great figures of early Christianity, Origen, Irenaeus, Anselm, Burden, and Bernard, was right. We all exist in the womb of God. But without that awareness of the motherhood of God, as well as the fatherhood of creation, we'll never know the fullness of God in our own lives, and none of us, either men or women, will come to the fullness of their own development. That depends, however, on whether or not we get the support from the churches that such ancient theological insight demands. It depends, too, on whether or not we ourselves come as individuals to understand that without the development of the feminine in us, we're all, men as well as women, only partially developed, only partially spiritual, only partially whole. But the feminine is every bit as denied as it is affirmed by those traditions that refuse the spiritual insights of women, who subordinate women to the men who beat and burn and kill them, and who counsel women into servitude but never into ministry or leadership. The full stature of women is every bit as much suppressed by the absence of emphasis on a woman's moral agency as it is enshrined by an insistence on a woman's spiritual value. And so we limp through life in that tradition, out of that perspective, on the globe, one-sided, underdeveloped, with a very myopic view of both God and ourselves. The question in the West is whether the divine feminine is simply a current fad, only a silly notion of even sillier feminists. However much we mock the idea, however, the truth is, ironically, as we see before us this morning, that every major spiritual tradition on earth carries within it at its very center and in its ancient core an awareness, a strong, living awareness of the divine feminine. And that is as true of the Hebrew scriptures that are the ground of the Abrahamic family. The ground of this entire family is the God who says to Moses, "Who shall I say sent me?" And that God answers Moses, "I tell them I am who am sent you." Not I am he who am. And true, not I am she who am, but I am who am. I am the essence of all life. I am the spirit that breathes in everyone. I am the one in whose image all human beings, male and female, Genesis could not say more clearly, are made. I am, in other words, ungendered, unsexed, pure spirit, pure energy, pure life, ineffable, the theologians call it, not able to be defined. But we do. As male, only male. Indeed, the notion of the divine feminine is not novel doctrine. It is not, as some want to argue, radical feminist drivel. No, the divine feminine, the I am who am, is as much the essence of all being as the Father God. Let no one tell you otherwise. Let no one deny you, woman or man, man or woman, the full image of God in you, feminine and masculine, masculine and feminine godness. Despite the patriarchal arguments to the contrary, the Hebrew scriptures are full of the female attributes of God. Isaiah in chapter 42, the Godhead, quote, cries out as a woman in labor. To the psalmist, God is a nursing woman. In Hosea, God is a cuddling mother who takes Israel on her lap. In Ezekiel, God is a washerwoman. In Genesis, God is a seamstress. To Job, God is a cook. And in Proverbs, God, she, wisdom, is the homemaker who invites the whole world to her table. Clearly, after having the female imagery of God suppressed in order to establish the patriarchy of male lordship, we may be confused about who God is. But God is not. God does not have and clearly never has had an identity problem. Our understanding of God then must also be inclusive. But what does all of this have to do with us now, here and now, in this parliament, in this world, on the brink of a summit in Copenhagen? The answer is obvious if we think long enough. In the light of the divine feminine, on what grounds do we possibly deny the feminine face of God among us a place at our tables, a chance to be listened to, the right perhaps even to be heard, the fullness of moral agency, a public role to be reckoned with? How dare we deny God's feminine image, its recognition as a receptacle of wisdom, and at what cost, both to our spiritual development and our personal and social development as well? The social implications of denying this topic are enormous. They're life-changing. They're spiritually stunting. The fact is that by casting God in male form only, we limit our knowledge of God. We enthrone maleness, God the Father, God the avenging judge, God the warrior, and God the lawgiver become the whole image of God to us. This is God above the world. This is the God not defined by God, but defined by Plato and Aristotle, who argued that because God is perfect, God must be indifferent to us, because to be related to another is to be able to change. And to change, they argue, is to be imperfect. But a remote God is not the God of the Judeo-Christian scriptures. And without a conscious awareness of the rest of the essence of God, we're losing sight of God, our Mother. God the Mother is the God who stands by while we betray our best selves, and she loves us back to life. God the Mother, by giving us free will, makes us co-creators of the world. God our Mother encourages us through the natural, normal evils of life to repent and repair them, while she enables us to survive them. God the Mother carries us rather than lords it over us. While the accumulated science of global warming, for instance, is now beginning to dawn finally around the dark ages of the universal mind, God our Mother brings us to consciousness enough to pray for deliverance. Deliverance from our indifference to facts we can change, and our continuing devotion to folly, both of which are our responsibility, whole and entire, not God's at all. The divine feminine is as much about compassion as we struggle as it is about meting out justice when we fail. The God who is both feminine and masculine energy not only raises standards, but helps us over the bar. This God is not only Father, warrior, and judge. This God is also the divine feminine, the one who cares for a world in which feeling is the only glue that can possibly hold us together. The power of this Mother God lies in the passion it takes to be patient as we fall and get up, and fall and get up, and fall and get up.